They told us Singapore could not fall. They told us the guns pointed out to sea would stop any invasion fleet before it reached the harbor. They told us the jungle to the north was impenetrable, that no army could march through it, that the Strait of Johore was our moat, and the British Empire was our castle. They told us many things. All of them were lies. I was 24 years old when I stopped being Corporal James Bradley of His Majesty's Royal Norfolk Regiment and became prisoner number 473 of the Imperial Japanese Army. The transformation took 7 days. 7 days for a fortress that was supposed to hold forever. 7 days for 85,000 men to become something less than soldiers, less than men, less than anything we had been before. February 8th, 1942. That was the day the Japanese crossed the strait. We had been hearing the artillery for weeks, a distant thunder rolling down from Malaya like a storm that never broke. Every day the sound grew closer. Every day new units arrived from up country, exhausted men with hollow eyes who would not talk about what they had seen. They came down the peninsula in trucks, on foot, some crawling, all of them retreating. The Japanese were not supposed to be able to do that. The jungle was supposed to stop them. The jungle stopped nothing. I remember standing on the Alexandra Road with my rifle, watching the smoke rise from the oil refineries the engineers had blown, black columns twisting into the sky like funeral pyres. Someone said they were denying the enemy resources. It looked like we were burning our own house down before the thieves arrived. The smoke blocked out the sun. Ash fell like gray snow. My uniform was covered in it. My face was covered in it. Everything tasted of carbon and defeat. The order came down on the 13th. Withdraw to the city perimeter. Abandon the outer positions. Fall back. That is when I knew we were finished. You do not retreat into a city unless you plan to surrender or die there. There is no third option. My sergeant, a man named Collins, who had fought in the last war and wore his mustache like a monument to that time, gathered us in the rubble of what had been a police station. He did not give us a speech about duty or the king. He looked at us with eyes that had already accepted what was coming and said only this: save your ammunition. When it runs out, use your bayonet. When your bayonet breaks, use your hands. When your hands fail, pray. Then he walked away to check the perimeter, and I never saw him alive again. We held Alexandra Road for 2 days. The Japanese came at us in waves, not massive human walls like the propaganda said, but small units moving with precision, flanking, probing, finding weakness, and exploiting it. They had artillery support. We had rifles and 3 machine guns between 60 men. They had air cover. We had smoke and prayers. On the second day, a shell landed directly on the machine gun nest to my left. I felt the concussion before I heard the sound. A wall of pressure that lifted me off my feet and dropped me into a drainage ditch filled with oily water. When I pulled myself out, the gun and the 3 men operating it were gone. Just a crater and pieces. That night, my best mate Tommy Wilson from Norwich found me in what remained of a shophouse. He had a cut across his forehead that would not stop bleeding, and his hands were shaking so badly he could not light his cigarette. I lit it for him. We sat in the dark, listening to the artillery walk across the city, each impact closer than the last, and Tommy said the thing we were all thinking, but nobody would speak. We are not getting out of here. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say reinforcements were coming, that the fleet would arrive, that someone in command had a plan, but the words died in my mouth because I knew they would be lies, and Tommy deserved better than lies. So I just nodded, and we sat there smoking in the dark while the city burned around us. On the 14th, the water supply was hit. Engineers said we had maybe 24 hours of reserves. After that, nothing. You can fight without food. You can fight without sleep. You cannot fight without water, not in the tropics. Not in February when the heat turns your uniform into a wet oven and every breath feels like drowning in hot soup. By midday on the 15th, men were collapsing from dehydration faster than from Japanese bullets. I saw a private from the Australian Division drink from a puddle in the street, filthy water mixed with oil and God knows what else. He was crying while he drank. The word came at 1600 hours. Cease fire. Surrender. General Percival had signed the papers, the largest capitulation in British military history. 85,000 men laying down their arms to an army half that size. I heard the order and felt nothing. No shame, no relief, just a vast emptiness where emotions used to be. I set my rifle down against a wall very carefully, as if it mattered how I placed it, as if there was still protocol in defeat. The barrel was hot from firing. I had 17 rounds left. I remember counting them, 17 chances to keep fighting, now meaningless. The Japanese soldiers arrived an hour later. They came down Alexandra Road in trucks, and we stood in ragged lines waiting for them, hands visible, weapons stacked. Some of the men were crying. Most just stared at nothing. When the first truck stopped, a Japanese officer stepped out, a sword at his hip that caught the late sun and flashed like a signal. He looked at us the way you look at cattle in a pen, not with hatred, not with triumph, with assessment, counting value. His soldiers moved through our ranks, pulling men out seemingly at random. Officers first, anyone with insignia, anyone who looked like they might be important. A lieutenant standing 3 men to my right was dragged out of line. He protested, said something about the Geneva Convention. A rifle butt to his stomach folded him in half. They dragged him to the truck. I watched him go and understood the first law of this new existence. Silence equals survival. Visibility equals death. They took our personal effects next. Not just weapons. Everything. Watches, rings, wallets, photographs. A Japanese soldier, young, maybe 18, stopped in front of me and held out his hand. I gave him my watch, my father's watch, 17 jewel movement. He looked at it, grunted, shoved it in his pocket. Then he saw my wedding ring. I had married Sarah 3 months before shipping out. 3 months of marriage, and I had spent 2 of them at sea. The soldier pointed at the ring. I worked it off my finger. The metal had left a pale band on my skin. He took it and moved to Tommy. Tommy had a locket with a photograph of his mother inside. The soldier ripped it off his neck, opened it, looked at the photo, then threw the locket in the dirt and stepped on it. Tommy's face went white, but he said nothing. The locket stayed there in the dirt with the photograph of his mother staring up at the sky. He could not pick it up. We were not allowed to move. They marched us north, 18 miles to Changi on the eastern edge of the island. 18 miles in the tropical afternoon heat with no water and no rest. We walked in columns 4 wide, thousands of us, a river of defeated men flowing down roads lined with burned-out vehicles and bodies nobody had collected. The Japanese soldiers walked alongside us with rifles ready. If you fell, they dragged you to the side of the road. Sometimes they shot you. Sometimes they just left you there. I saw both. Tommy stayed close to me. A Welsh miner named Davies from another company attached himself to us. He had a limp from shrapnel in his calf, but he kept up. The 3 of us formed a small unit of survival, watching each other, sharing the unspoken understanding that alone we would die, but together we might last a few days longer. Davies had fought in Spain before the war. He knew things. He whispered them as we walked. Do not make eye contact with the guards. Do not walk too fast or too slow. Stay in the middle of the column, never the edges. The edges are where they pull people out. I absorbed his words like a student taking notes on how to stay alive. We reached Changi after dark. It was a military barracks complex designed to house maybe 1,000 men. They crammed 50,000 of us inside. The rest went to other camps around the island. We slept on concrete floors, packed so tightly you could not turn over without waking the men on either side of you. There were no beds, no blankets, no mosquito nets. The toilets overflowed within hours. The smell became part of the air you breathed, thick and rancid, coating the back of your throat until you stopped noticing it because there was no escape from it. The food came the next morning. Rice. A handful of boiled white rice dumped into whatever container you could find. I used my helmet. The rice was watery, undersalted, already starting to ferment in the heat. I ate it anyway. Tommy could not. He tried and vomited it back up. Davies and I split his portion. Waste nothing. That was the new rule. If you cannot eat it today, you will wish you had tomorrow. Within 3 days, men started dying. Dysentery first, then malaria, then cholera. The Japanese provided no medical supplies. Our own doctors, those who had survived, worked with nothing. No drugs, no bandages, no anesthetic. I watched a surgeon named Markowitz amputate a man's gangrenous foot using a bayonet and a leather belt for the patient to bite down on. The man screamed for 11 minutes. Then he went into shock and died. Markowitz sat on the floor afterward with blood up to his elbows and did not move for an hour. Someone asked him if he was all right. He did not answer. We lived like that for 8 months, 50,000 men rotting in concrete buildings under a tropical sun. The Japanese guards walked the perimeter but rarely came inside. They did not need to. The disease did their work for them. Every morning we carried out the dead. At first we counted them. After a while we stopped. Numbers stopped meaning anything. 100 dead today, 100 dead tomorrow. It was just a background noise, like the rain or the insects. Tommy developed malaria in May. The chills hit him in the night, and he shook so hard I thought his bones would break. His temperature spiked to the point where he was speaking in fragments, calling for people who were not there. Davies and I took turns holding him down when the convulsions came. We had no quinine. We had nothing. We just waited to see if his body would fight it off or surrender. After 4 days, the fever broke. He survived, but he was weaker. He had always been thin. Now he looked like a skeleton with skin stretched over it. His eyes had sunken back into his skull. He looked 60 years old. He was 22. In June, an Indian sepoy named Patel, who had been sleeping near us, died from cholera. He was fine in the evening. By morning, he was dead. Cholera moved that fast. One day you were alive. The next, you were voiding every fluid in your body until there was nothing left, and your heart simply stopped from dehydration. They carried Patel out with a dozen other bodies that morning. He had told me once that he had a wife and 2 children in Delhi. I never learned their names. I do not know if they ever found out what happened to him. October brought the selection. A Japanese officer walked into our barracks with a translator and announced that volunteers were needed for labor duty in Thailand. Light work, better food, better conditions. Nobody believed him, but nobody volunteered, so the guards walked through the barracks pointing at men. You. I was sitting against a wall trying to clean a tropical ulcer on my ankle when a guard stopped in front of me and pointed. I stood up. Tommy stood up beside me. Davies across the room started to rise, but the guard waved him back down. Then the guard pointed at Davies anyway. Apparently they were taking him too. They assembled 600 of us in the yard. We stood in formation while the officer gave a speech in Japanese that the translator converted into broken English. We were going to build a railway. It would connect Bangkok to Rangoon. It was important work for the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. We would be treated fairly according to military law. We would be allowed to write letters home. We would receive medical care. The translator said all of this without emotion, as if he did not know that every word was ash. They loaded us into trucks the next morning, 50 men per truck. We sat on wooden benches facing each other, knees touching, crushed together like cargo. The trucks had canvas roofs that trapped the heat. Within an hour, the temperature inside was unbearable. Men fainted. There was nowhere for them to fall. They just slumped against the men next to them and were held upright by the pressure of bodies. We had 1 canteen of water per truck. 50 men, 1 canteen. Do the mathematics. The journey took 5 days. We traveled by truck, then by train, then by truck again. They fed us once a day, the same rice gruel we had eaten at Changi. At night, they locked us in warehouses or empty buildings and posted guards. We slept on dirt floors, on concrete, on wooden planks, wherever they dumped us. The man next to me on the second night, a corporal from the Manchester Regiment whose name I never learned, died sometime in the darkness. I woke up pressed against his cold body. When I pushed him away, he toppled over stiff. Rigor mortis had already set in. The guards removed him in the morning without comment. Nobody knew what he had died from. Starvation, disease, despair. Take your pick. We crossed into Thailand on the 4th day. The jungle pressed in on both sides of the dirt road, a wall of green so thick you could not see 10 feet into it. The air was heavy, wet, alive with insects. I had thought Singapore was hot. This was different. This was heat with weight. Heat that pushed down on you like a physical force. Breathing felt like drowning. Sweat poured off me until my uniform was soaked through and my skin began to chafe and blister. We arrived at Kanchanaburi camp on the 5th day. It was not a camp. It was a clearing in the jungle with bamboo huts and a wire fence. Mud everywhere. The latrines were open pits already crawling with flies. The huts had no walls, just roofs and platforms. You could see straight through them. Privacy did not exist. Dignity did not exist. We were animals in a pen, and the Japanese guards walking the perimeter with rifles made sure we understood that. They assembled us in the mud, and a Japanese officer walked out to address us. He was short, barrel-chested, with a face that showed no expression at all. The translator stood beside him, a thin Thai man who looked at the ground while he spoke. The officer said something in clipped Japanese sentences. The translator turned to us. "You are here to build a railway, 415 kilometers through jungle and mountains. You will work every day. You will meet your quotas. If you do not work, you do not eat. If you refuse to work, you will be punished. There are no exceptions. There are no rest days. You will work until the railway is complete or until you die. There is no third option." The officer turned and walked away. The guards began shouting, herding us toward the huts, shoving men who moved too slowly. I found a space on a bamboo platform next to Tommy and Davies. The platform was about 2 feet off the muddy ground, split bamboo with gaps wide enough to see through. No mattress, no blanket, just bamboo. This was where we would sleep. This was home now. That night, I lay on the platform staring up at the roof, listening to the jungle sounds, the insects and birds, and things I could not identify. Tommy was shaking again, malaria coming back. Davies was coughing, a wet rattling sound that meant his lungs were filling with fluid. Around me, 600 men breathed and groaned and whispered in the darkness. Somewhere far off, a man was crying, trying to muffle the sound but failing. I closed my eyes and tried to think of Sarah. Her face, her voice, the way she smiled. I could not remember. The memory was already fading, washed away by exhaustion and fear and the smell of mud and shit and rotting bamboo. I tried harder. I forced my mind back to our wedding day, to the moment she walked down the aisle. Nothing, just a vague shape in a white dress. The details were gone. I realized then that I had already started to die. Not my body, not yet. But the parts of me that made me James Bradley, the parts that loved Sarah and remembered home and cared about tomorrow, those parts were being stripped away piece by piece. The jungle was not just around us. It was inside us, growing, consuming, turning us into something else. A guard walked past the hut, his boots squelching in the mud. His silhouette was black against the faint light from the guard tower. He was smoking. I could smell it. Tobacco and something sweeter. Maybe opium. He stopped, looked into the hut at the rows of men on the platforms, then kept walking. We were not even worth watching closely. We were already beaten. The next morning, they woke us at 4. No bugle, no announcement. Just guards walking through the huts, beating the bamboo platforms with sticks and screaming in Japanese. We stumbled out into the pre-dawn darkness, formed lines, waited. My legs ached. My ankle ulcer had opened during the night, and blood was seeping into my boot. Tommy could barely stand. Davies was still coughing. None of it mattered. They gave us breakfast. A ladle of rice soup, watery and gray, into whatever container we had. I used my helmet again. The soup was lukewarm and tasted of nothing. I drank it in 3 swallows. It was not enough to fill my stomach. It would never be enough. But it was all there was. Then we marched. 8 kilometers through the jungle on a trail that was barely a trail, just a path of mud and roots. The sun came up and the heat came with it, slamming down through the canopy in shafts of white light that turned the air into steam. Mosquitoes swarmed. I breathed them in. Sweat ran into my eyes, stinging, blurring my vision. My boots squelched with every step. The man in front of me stumbled and fell. A guard kicked him until he got up. We kept marching. We reached the work site as the sun cleared the trees. It was a cut in the jungle where they were trying to push the railway through a ridge of solid rock. The rock was gray and white, quartz or limestone, hard as steel. They had given us hammers and chisels, hand tools, no machinery, no explosives, just hammers and chisels and human muscle. 600 men with primitive tools facing a mountain expected to carve a path through it. The Japanese engineer in charge pointed at the rock face and shouted instructions through the translator. Each man was expected to move 1 cubic meter of rock per day. 1 cubic meter, that is a cube 1 meter on each side. Solid rock, with a hammer and chisel. It was impossible. We all knew it was impossible. That did not matter. I picked up a hammer. The handle was rough wood, already stained dark from other men's sweat and blood. I picked up a chisel. The edge was dull. I walked to the rock face, found a spot, placed the chisel against the stone, and swung the hammer. The impact jarred my arm. The chisel bit into the rock, maybe a 1/4 inch. I swung again, another 1/4 inch. Again. The rock did not care. The rock would always win. By midday, my hands were bleeding. The hammer handle had rubbed the skin off my palms. Every swing sent pain shooting up my arms. My shoulders burned. My back screamed. I had moved perhaps 1/10 of a cubic meter, maybe less. I was so far behind quota, I would never catch up. All around me, men worked in silence. The only sounds were hammer on chisel, hammer on rock, the steady percussion of 600 men beating themselves to death, one swing at a time. Guards walked among us, watching, waiting for someone to slow down so they could justify a beating. Nobody slowed down. We kept swinging. At noon, they gave us 30 minutes. We sat in the mud, and they brought rice, another ladle of gray soup. I drank it. It did nothing. I was so hungry my stomach hurt. I looked at Tommy. His hands were bleeding worse than mine. His face was gray. He looked at me, and I saw in his eyes what I felt in my own chest. This will kill us. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. This work will grind us down until there is nothing left. We went back to the rock. Afternoon. The heat peaked. Men started collapsing. Dehydration, exhaustion. The guards dragged them aside. Some of them got up. Some did not. One man, a private from the Australian division, collapsed and did not move. A guard walked over, nudged him with his boot, shouted something. The man did not respond. The guard pulled out his pistol and shot him once in the head. The sound echoed off the rock face. Then the guard walked away. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We just kept swinging our hammers. That was the first day. By the end of the first month, I had learned to sleep through the screaming. That was the real change. Not the weight loss or the ulcers or the way my ribs now showed through my skin like piano keys. It was the screaming. At night, men screamed from nightmares, from pain, from fever dreams. At first it woke me. By week 4, I slept through it. The human body adapts to anything if you give it no choice. Tommy stopped talking in March. Not completely. He still spoke when necessary, when a guard asked a question or when work required coordination. But the casual speech, the jokes, the memories of home, all of that ended. He would sit on the bamboo platform after work, staring at his hands, and say nothing. His hands were destroyed. The hammer work had split the calluses open, then split the flesh beneath. They wept a clear fluid that attracted flies. He wrapped them in strips torn from his shirt, but the blood soaked through. Every morning he unwrapped them, looked at the damage, and wrapped them again. No expression on his face, just mechanical assessment. His hands were tools that were breaking, and he was calculating how much longer they would function. Davies still talked, but only about practical things. Water sources, which guards were more dangerous. How to make the rice last longer in your stomach by chewing each grain 30 times before swallowing. He had become a catalog of survival techniques, most of them useless but repeated anyway, because having knowledge felt like having control. He showed me how to pack mud into my boots to cushion my feet. The mud dried hard and rubbed new blisters, but he insisted it helped. I did not argue. Arguing required energy I did not have. The work broke us in stages. First the hands, then the shoulders, then the back. By April, every man in the camp moved like he was 80 years old, shuffling, bent forward, unable to straighten. The cubic meter quota never changed. 1 meter of rock per day, 6 days a week. On the 7th day, we worked anyway, because the Japanese engineer decided we were behind schedule. Behind schedule meant beatings. Behind schedule meant reduced rations. Behind schedule meant men selected at random and locked in the punishment cage, a bamboo box 2 feet on each side where you could not stand or sit or lie down, only crouch, while the sun cooked you for 12 hours. I saw 4 men go into that cage. 2 came out alive. One of the dead ones was a lance corporal from the border regiment named Watts. He had been loud at Changi, always singing, always telling stories. The cage killed him in 8 hours. When they pulled him out, his skin was blistered from the sun, his lips cracked and bleeding, his eyes open and staring. They dumped his body by the latrines. It stayed there for a day and a half before they made prisoners bury it. By then, the rats had been at it. I walked past him twice during that time. The first time I looked away. The second time I did not. Looking away required energy. Caring required energy. I had none to spare. The sick list grew longer every week. Dr. Markowitz, the British surgeon who had nothing to work with, kept a ledger in which he recorded every illness: malaria, dysentery, beriberi, cholera, dengue fever, tropical ulcers, pellagra, scurvy. He wrote it all down in tiny, precise handwriting, as if documentation mattered, as if someone would read it someday and care. I asked him once why he kept the ledger when there were no medicines to treat anyone. He looked at me with eyes that had stopped blinking normally, eyes that just stared, and said very quietly that it was the only thing keeping him sane. If he stopped recording, he would have to admit that his medical training was useless, that his oath to do no harm was a joke, that he was just watching men die and calling it doctoring. The hospital hut was the worst place in camp, worse than the latrines, worse than the punishment cage. It was a bamboo structure with no walls, just a roof and platforms where sick men lay waiting to either recover or die. Most died. The smell hit you 10 meters away. Feces, urine, vomit, rotting flesh, all of it fermenting in the tropical heat. Flies covered everything. When you walked in, they rose in a cloud, then settled again. The men on the platforms did not have the strength to wave them away. Flies walked on their faces, on their eyes, in and out of their mouths. Some men were so far gone they did not notice. Tommy ended up there in May. His malaria came back, worse than before. The fever spiked so high I thought his brain would cook. He thrashed and shouted in languages that were not English, strings of words that made no sense, names I did not recognize. Davies and I carried him to the hospital hut. Markowitz examined him with hands that shook from his own undiagnosed illness, probably malaria or dengue or both, and said what he always said: rest, liquids, wait. There was no quinine. There had never been quinine. Men either fought off malaria with their own immune systems or they died. Those were the options. I visited Tommy every evening after work, not because I thought it would help, because I needed to see if he was still breathing. That was the measure of friendship now. Not conversation, not comfort, just checking if your mate was still alive. On the third day, I arrived and found him awake. His eyes were open, staring at the bamboo roof. I sat down next to him. He did not acknowledge me. I stayed anyway. After maybe 10 minutes, he spoke. I cannot feel my feet. I looked down. His feet were swollen, the skin stretched tight and shiny. Beriberi, vitamin deficiency. It caused the flesh to swell with fluid until it looked like your body was inflating. In advanced cases, the fluid moved to your lungs and heart. Then you drowned from the inside. I told him his feet looked fine. The lie came easily now. Lies were kindness. He turned his head slightly to look at me. His eyes were yellow, jaundice maybe, or liver failure. His lips were cracked and bleeding. He tried to smile. The smile split his bottom lip further. Blood ran down his chin. "You are a terrible liar, James." Then he closed his eyes and slept. I sat there for another hour, listening to his breathing, ragged and wet. When I finally left, I knew I would not see him alive again. I was wrong. He survived. His body fought off the malaria one more time, but when he came back to work, he was not Tommy anymore. The person who walked out of that hospital hut was something else. A mechanism that looked like my friend, but had no expression, no emotion, nothing behind the eyes. He worked, he ate, he slept. That was all. The rest of him had died in there. June brought the monsoon, rain every day, sometimes for hours, sometimes for minutes, always heavy enough to turn the ground to liquid. The work site became a swamp. We stood in mud, up to our knees, chipping at rock that would not break. The tools slipped, the hammers were slick. Men fell constantly. When you fell in the mud, you had to push yourself up. If you stayed down, if you showed weakness, the guards noticed. Showing weakness was a mistake. I learned this watching a private named Henderson. He was young, maybe 19, from somewhere in the Midlands. He had kept a low profile for months, stayed quiet, did his work. Then one morning in the rain, he slipped on the muddy path to the work site. He went down hard, face first. He pushed himself up to his hands and knees. Then he stopped, just stopped, kneeling in the mud, not moving. A guard walked over and shouted at him. Henderson did not respond. The guard kicked him in the ribs. Henderson fell onto his side. The guard kicked him again. Then again. The sound was wet, ribs breaking. Henderson made a noise, not quite a scream, more like air being forced out. The guard kicked him in the head. Once. Twice. Henderson stopped moving. The guard walked away. Henderson lay in the mud. We walked past him on our way to the worksite. He was still breathing. I could see his chest moving, shallow little movements. By the time we marched back that evening, he was dead. The rain had filled his mouth and nose. He had drowned in 3 inches of water because he did not have the strength to turn his head. They left his body there for 2 days. It bloated in the heat. When they finally made prisoners remove it, the flesh came off in sheets. The men carrying him tried not to touch the skin. It was pointless. You could not avoid it. They buried him in a shallow grave near the latrines. No marker, no name, just dirt. The rain made everything worse. The ulcers on my ankle stopped healing. The flesh turned black at the edges. Necrotic. Dead tissue. I could smell it. Sweet and rotten. I asked Markowitz to look at it. He peeled back the bandage I had made from a strip of shirt and stared at the wound for a long time. Then he looked up at me. "How attached are you to that foot?" I did not answer. We both knew what he was asking. If the infection spread to the bone, amputation was the only option. Amputation with no anesthetic, no proper tools, no way to prevent post-surgical infection. The survival rate was maybe 10%. Most men died on the table or 3 days later from sepsis. Markowitz gave me a sliver of sulfanilamide. He had maybe 20 tablets left for 600 men. He broke one in half, then broke the half in half, and gave me one of the quarters. He told me to grind it into powder and pack it directly into the wound. It would hurt. I did it that night. It felt like acid. I bit down on a piece of bamboo and made no sound. Crying out would wake the men around me. Waking men who were finally sleeping was cruelty. The infection slowed. The black edges stopped spreading. But the wound never fully closed. It wept clear fluid constantly. Flies laid eggs in it. I picked out maggots every morning, dozens of them, small and white, writhing in the flesh. Markowitz said the maggots were actually helping. They ate the dead tissue and left the living tissue alone. Nature's debridement. I let them stay. If maggots wanted to live in my ankle, they were welcome. In July, the Japanese announced that the railway was behind schedule. We were working too slowly. New quotas, 1.5 cubic meters per day, 50% increase. Impossible became more impossible. The engineer in charge, a captain whose name we never learned, walked the worksite with a bamboo cane, striking men who were not moving fast enough. Not hard blows, just taps. Little reminders that he was watching, that he had the power. Some men he struck once, others he struck repeatedly. There was no pattern. It was arbitrary. That was the point. Davies took a blow to the kidneys that dropped him to his knees. He gasped, could not breathe for maybe 30 seconds. When he finally sucked in air, there was blood on his lips. Internal bleeding. He spat into the mud, red mixing with brown. Then he stood up and went back to work. That night, he pissed blood. By morning, the bleeding had stopped. He never mentioned it again. The food rations were cut. Not officially announced, just quietly reduced. The ladle of rice soup became smaller, watery. You could see through it. Men started losing weight faster. Ribs became visible on everyone. Hip bones jutted out like knife handles. Faces hollowed. Eyes sank deeper into skulls. We were becoming skeletons with skin. Living corpses. We joked about it sometimes, black humor, calling ourselves the Walking Dead. Then men started actually dying from starvation, and we stopped joking. A lance corporal named Briggs died in his sleep in August. Not from disease, not from injury. He just did not wake up. His body had consumed itself. There was nothing left to burn. His heart stopped because it had no fuel. They carried him out in the morning, and his body weighed maybe 70 pounds. He had been a big man at Changi, over 6 feet, broad shoulders. Now he was a bag of bones that 2 men could lift easily. That was when the stealing started. You could not steal from the guards. That was suicide. But you could steal from other prisoners. You could steal from the sick. You could steal from the dying. You could steal from the dead. Food went missing. Rations disappeared. Men accused each other, fought, too weak to do real damage but trying anyway. Pathetic struggles in the mud that ended with both parties exhausted and nothing resolved. I caught Tommy one night going through the pack of a man who had died that afternoon. The body was still in the hut, waiting to be removed in the morning. Tommy was crouched over it, searching the pockets, looking for anything edible. He found a small tin, maybe 2 ounces, something the dead man had hidden. Tommy opened it. Rice. Raw rice. Maybe a handful. He tilted his head back and poured it into his mouth, chewing, swallowing. I watched him. He watched me watching him. Neither of us spoke. When he finished, he put the tin back in the dead man's pocket and walked away. I said nothing. What would I say? That it was wrong. That it was disrespectful. The dead man did not need rice. Tommy did. The mathematics were simple. Survival had no morality. You took what you needed to stay alive. The alternative was becoming the corpse someone else stole from. 2 weeks later, I did the same thing. A private from the Cambridgeshire Regiment died during the night. Dysentery. He had been sick for days, getting weaker, and finally his body just gave up. In the morning, they left his body on the platform while they organized the burial detail. I walked past him, stopped, looked around. Nobody was watching. I knelt down and searched his pockets, found a small cloth bundle, opened it. Salt, maybe a teaspoon. Precious. Salt prevented cramps, helped retain water, made the rice slightly less unbearable. I took it, put it in my pocket, walked away. That night, I used the salt on my rice. It tasted better. I felt no guilt. That frightened me more than anything. The fact that I could rob a corpse and feel nothing. The jungle had done its work. I was no longer civilized. I was something else, an animal wearing a man's skin. Tommy and I never discussed the stealing. We both knew. We both did it. Speaking it aloud would have required acknowledging what we had become. Silence was easier. Davies never stole. He was dying, but he refused to steal. I do not know if it was principle or simply exhaustion. By September, his dysentery was chronic. He had stopped digesting food. Everything went straight through him. Liquid, constant. His body was eating itself, and no amount of rice could stop it. He grew thinner. His skin turned gray. His eyes developed a glassy look. Markowitz told him plainly that he was dying. Davies nodded, accepted it, asked only how long. Markowitz guessed 2 weeks. Davies lasted 3. I sat with him the night before he died. He was in the hospital hut, on a platform near the entrance where the smell was slightly less terrible. He could not speak anymore. His throat had closed from dehydration, but his eyes were open. I sat next to him and talked. I do not remember what I said. Probably nothing important. Memories of England, the weather, stupid things. He listened. At one point, he reached out and gripped my hand. His hand was bone and skin, no muscle, no strength, but he held on. After maybe an hour, he let go. I left. He died just after dawn. They told me at morning assembly. I felt nothing. No grief, no sadness. Just a vague acknowledgement that the group of 3 was now a group of 2. Davies was gone. Tommy was barely Tommy. I was alone. They burned Davies' body in a pit with 5 others. The Japanese had stopped burying the dead individually. Too much work. Too many bodies. They dug mass graves and burned what they could. Buried the rest. The smoke from the pyres hung over the camp constantly. Sweet and thick. You could taste it. Human fat turning to smoke. After a while, you stopped noticing. October brought worse news. The Japanese announced that the railway deadline had been moved up. Completion by December. Impossible. We were not even halfway done. The engineer stood in front of us at morning assembly and explained through the translator that if we did not finish on time, there would be consequences. He did not specify. He did not need to. The work hours increased. 5 in the morning until 10 at night. 17 hours. 1 break at midday for rice soup. The rest was swinging hammers at rock that would not yield. Men collapsed constantly. The guards beat them awake. If they could not stand, they were dragged to the side and left. By evening, there were always bodies by the side of the work site, some dead, some unconscious. The guards did not differentiate. A corporal named Willis collapsed in front of me in late October. He went down like a puppet with cut strings. I stepped over him and kept working. A guard walked over, kicked him. Willis did not move. The guard pulled out his pistol. I heard the shot but did not turn around. I knew what it was. I kept swinging my hammer. That night, the count was short by 7 men. 7 dead in 1 day. The Japanese officer in charge seemed annoyed by this, as if we were being difficult on purpose. He informed us through the translator that the quota would remain the same regardless of how many men died. If 600 men could not do the work, then 593 men would do it. Simple mathematics. By November, the camp population was maybe 420, We had started with 600, 180 dead in 13 months, 30% casualties. Those were battlefield numbers, but this was not a battle. This was just work. Rock and hammers and men dying one swing at a time. Tommy stopped eating, not by choice. His stomach rejected the rice. He vomited after every meal. His body was shutting down. I watched it happen, slow and inevitable. He grew thinner. His skin turned yellow. His gums bled. Scurvy, beriberi, pellagra. He had all of it. His hair fell out in clumps. His teeth loosened. One morning he spat out a molar without realizing it. The tooth landed in the mud. He stared at it. Then he kept walking to the work site. I asked Markowitz if there was anything he could do. He looked at Tommy, then at me, and shook his head. He needs vitamins. He needs protein. He needs food that is not rice. We have none of those things. His body is cannibalizing itself. Heart, lungs, muscles, all being consumed for energy. When there is nothing left, he will die. I would guess 2 weeks, maybe less. I went back to the hut and sat next to Tommy. He was staring at nothing. I asked him if he was afraid. He turned his head slowly, like it required enormous effort, and looked at me with eyes that were no longer his. I stopped being afraid in May, James. Fear requires hope. I have none left. He died on November 23rd, not in the hospital hut. He refused to go there. He said if he was going to die, he would die on the bamboo platform where he slept, not on a bamboo platform surrounded by strangers. He lay down after work one evening, closed his eyes, and never opened them again. His breathing got slower, shallower. By midnight, it stopped. I sat next to his body until morning. I did not cry. I did not pray. I just sat there in the darkness, listening to the jungle and the insects and the other men breathing, and I thought about Norwich, Tommy's home, a city I had never seen. I tried to imagine his mother receiving the telegram. Your son is dead, died building a railway in a jungle, buried in an unmarked grave, no body to bring home, just words on paper. They took Tommy's body away in the morning. I never saw where they put him. There were too many graves by then, no markers, no names, just patches of disturbed earth scattered around the camp. Tommy was under one of them, or maybe they burned him. It did not matter. He was gone. I was the last one left. The railway was completed on December 16, 1943. The Japanese held a small ceremony. The officer in charge drove a ceremonial spike and made a speech about the triumph of will over nature. We stood in formation. 432 prisoners still alive out of the 600 who had arrived, and watched him celebrate. When he finished, they gave us double rations that night, 2 ladles of rice soup instead of 1. This was our reward. Rice soup. For building a railway that cost 12,000 Allied lives and 90,000 Asian lives, 102,000 dead, to connect 2 cities. I ate the extra soup. It tasted of nothing. I felt nothing. Tommy was dead. Davies was dead. Patel was dead. Henderson was dead. Briggs was dead. Willis was dead. The list was endless. Everyone was dead or dying. I was not special. I had just been lucky. So far. The work continued after completion. Maintenance, expansion, guard duty along the tracks. We were still needed. Still useful. We kept working. Kept dying. Just slower now. The quotas eased. The beatings lessened. Not from mercy. From practicality. They had invested too much effort in us to waste us completely. We were tools, expensive tools. You do not throw away expensive tools while they can still function. I survived 1944 in a haze. The months blurred. Work, sleep, rice, sickness. I had malaria 4 more times. I had dysentery twice. The ulcer on my ankle never healed, but it did not kill me either. I just lived with it. A permanent wound. A reminder. In August 1945, the guards disappeared. Not all at once. Gradually. First the junior officers, then the enlisted men. Within a week, only a skeleton crew remained. The Japanese officer in charge looked nervous. He stopped making speeches, stopped holding assemblies. Something was happening. We did not know what. On August 15th, a guard we had never seen before walked into the camp, gathered us in the yard, and through the translator told us the war was over. Japan had surrendered. We were liberated. We stood there, 417 men who had weighed 170 pounds 13 months ago and now weighed 90 and processed the information. The war was over. We were free. Nobody cheered. Nobody cried. We just stood there. Free. The word had no meaning. We had forgotten what freedom was. We had been prisoners so long that liberty was a foreign concept, something that happened to other people in other lives. Not to us. We were prisoners. That was our identity now. British forces arrived 3 weeks later. They flew us to Rangoon, put us in hospitals, fed us real food, gave us clean water, clean beds, medicine. Doctors examined me and recorded the damage: chronic malaria, vitamin deficiency, muscle atrophy, dental decay, infected wounds, permanent scarring, psychological trauma. They wrote it all down in a medical chart, gave me a number, made me a statistic. I spent 6 months recovering. Physically, mentally, I would never recover. None of us would. The jungle does not release you just because you leave it. It stays inside, growing. In March 1946, they shipped me home. England. I landed at Southampton. My mother was waiting. She did not recognize me. I had left weighing 168 pounds. I came back weighing 112. I had left with brown hair. I came back with gray. I had left 24 years old. I came back looking 50. She cried. I did not. I had forgotten how. I was home, but I had left something on that railway, something I would never get back. The war had taken Tommy and Davies and 400 other men from my camp alone, but it had taken something from me too. My humanity, my ability to feel, my belief that the world made sense. I was alive. The railway was dead. Destroyed by Allied bombing within 2 years of completion. All that work, all those bodies, for nothing. A railway that operated for 24 months, then turned back into jungle. The bones are still there. 12,000 Allied soldiers, 90,000 Asian laborers, all of them under the dirt and the roots and the trees. The jungle swallowed them. Eventually, it will swallow the railway too. Nature always wins. I am 90 years old now. I have lived 64 years since the railway. I have a wife, children, grandchildren, a normal life, but I still wake up at 4 in the morning. I still taste rice soup. I still see Tommy's face when he handed me that tin, when he stopped being my friend and became a creature that stole from corpses. I still see Davies dying on that platform. I still hear the hammers on rock. The jungle is still inside me. They gave me a pension, a medal, an apology from the Japanese government that arrived 50 years too late. None of it matters. The only thing that matters is that I survived and better men died. That is the truth. I am not a hero. I am not special. I am just the one who lived long enough to tell the story. That is all. The British medical officer who examined me in Rangoon wrote in my chart that I was suffering from acute malnutrition, chronic malaria, infected tropical ulcers, severe vitamin deficiency, partial hearing loss, dental decay, and probable psychological trauma. He wrote all of this in neat handwriting while I sat on a metal examination table wearing nothing but shorts that hung off my hips like a flag on a windless day. He asked me questions. I answered them. He made notes. At one point, he paused and looked at me, really looked at me, and asked if I had witnessed any war crimes, any atrocities, anything that should be reported for future tribunals. I thought about Tommy cutting meat from a corpse behind the burial pit. I thought about stepping over Willis while a guard shot him in the back of the head. I thought about stealing salt from a dead man's pocket and feeling nothing. I thought about all of it. Then I looked at the medical officer and said, "No, sir, nothing worth reporting." He nodded, made a note, moved on to the next question. That was the moment I understood that the war was over, but the lying had just begun. They kept me in hospital in Rangoon for 6 weeks, fed me 3 meals a day, small portions at first because my stomach could not handle normal food. The first time they gave me meat, actual beef. I vomited it up within an hour. My body had forgotten what protein was. They put me on a special diet, porridge, broth, gradually introducing solid food like I was an infant learning to eat. Around me in the ward were other men from other camps, all of us skeletal, all of us yellow from jaundice, all of us silent. We did not talk to each other. What would we say? We knew. We all knew. Words were unnecessary. At night, I dreamed I was back at the worksite. The same dream every night. I was swinging a hammer at the rock face, and the rock was bleeding. Red blood running down the gray stone. I kept swinging, and the blood kept flowing, and behind me, Tommy was standing with his hands out, asking for food, and I had none to give him. I would wake up at 4 in the morning, the time they used to wake us for work, and lie in the clean white hospital bed, staring at the ceiling until dawn. The nurses thought I was recovering. I was not recovering. I was just existing in a different location. They shipped me home in March 1946. Troop ship across the Indian Ocean, through the Suez Canal, across the Mediterranean, through Gibraltar, up to Southampton. 4 weeks at sea. I spent most of it on deck staring at the water. Other men celebrated, told stories, talked about what they would do when they got home. I said nothing. A sergeant from the Manchester Regiment tried to befriend me, asked where I had been during the war. I told him, Thailand, Burma Railway. His face changed. He stopped asking questions. Word spread. Men avoided me after that. Railway survivors were different, contaminated. We carried something that made other soldiers uncomfortable. Proof that there were worse things than combat, worse things than dying quickly. My mother met me at Southampton. I saw her on the dock scanning the faces of men coming down the gangway. She was looking for her son. She did not recognize me. I walked up to her and said, "Hello, Mum." She stared at me. Her face went white. She touched my cheek like she was checking if I was real. Then she started crying. Not quiet tears, loud sobbing that made people turn and look. I stood there and felt nothing. I had forgotten how to cry. I had forgotten how to feel anything except hunger and fear, and those were so constant they did not even register as emotions anymore. They were just background noise. She took me home. The house was exactly as I remembered and completely foreign at the same time. My room, my bed, my things. A version of myself that no longer existed. She made tea. We sat in the kitchen. She asked careful questions. How was I? Was I hungry? Did I need anything? I answered in short sentences. I am fine. No, thank you. Nothing. She did not ask about the war. Nobody asked about the war. They could see it in my face, in my body, in the way I could not sit still, the way I flinched at sudden noises, the way I stared at my plate counting the food to make sure it was real. My brother had died in France, Normandy, June 1944, killed by artillery during the push inland from the beaches. My mother told me this carefully, watching my face for reaction. I nodded, said I was sorry, meant it as much as I could mean anything. But the truth was, I felt nothing. My capacity for grief had been used up. Tommy, Davies, 400 men. My brother was just another name on a list that was too long to process. My mother saw my face, saw the absence. She stopped talking about him. I could not sleep in the bed. Too soft. I tried for 3 nights and could not do it. On the 4th night, I took the blanket and slept on the floor. That worked better. Hard surface. Familiar. My mother found me there in the morning. Did not say anything. Just closed the door quietly and left me there. I tried to find work. The government was helping returning soldiers with employment. I went to the labor exchange. They looked at my work history, asked what I had done in the Army. I told them I had been a prisoner of war. They made notes, asked if I had any skills. I said I could break rocks with a hammer. They did not laugh. They gave me a list of construction jobs. I took one, lasted 4 days. The foreman shouted at someone for working too slowly, and I hit him. Did not think about it. Just swung. Broke his nose. They fired me on the spot. I walked home and did not tell my mother. I tried other jobs. Factory work. Warehouse loading. Deliveries. I was fired from all of them. Too quiet. Too angry. Could not follow instructions. Could not work with other people. The truth was, I could not function. I had been a prisoner for too long. Freedom was harder than captivity. In the camp, I knew the rules. Do your work. Stay invisible. Survive. In England, there were no rules. Too many choices. Too many people. Too much noise. I walked through town and felt like I was drowning in normalcy. People complaining about rationing, about the weather, about things that did not matter. I wanted to scream at them. You have food. You have water. You have roofs. What more do you want? I never screamed. I just walked away. I met Sarah in June, my wife. I had not seen her since I shipped out in 1941. 5 years. She had waited. Incredible. Stupid. Admirable. I do not know what it was. She came to the house. My mother must have told her I was back. Sarah knocked on the door. I opened it. She looked at me and her eyes went wide. I was 98 pounds. My hair was gray. I looked 50 years old. I was 26. She tried to smile, failed, started crying instead. I invited her in. We sat in the parlor. She held my hand. Her hand was warm and soft, and I could not feel it. My hands were scar tissue and calluses. She asked if I was all right. I lied, said I was fine. She knew it was a lie. She married me anyway. We were married in August 1946. Small ceremony. A few people. I wore a suit that hung off me like it was 2 sizes too large. During the vows, I forgot my lines. The vicar had to prompt me. Sarah squeezed my hand. I finished the vows. We were married. That night in the hotel room, she saw my body for the first time. The scars, the ulcers that had healed wrong, the missing toenails, the way my ribs stood out. She cried again. I told her not to look. She said she wanted to understand. I told her there was nothing to understand. This was just what I looked like now. We did not consummate the marriage that night. I could not. My body did not work that way anymore. She held me instead. I lay there, stiff and awkward, and eventually fell asleep. I dreamed about the railway. I always dreamed about the railway. We tried to build a normal life. I found a job that lasted. Postal worker, simple, delivering mail, walking routes. No supervisors, no shouting. I could do it. Sarah worked as a seamstress. We rented a small flat, saved money, had routines. On the surface, we looked normal. Underneath, I was disintegrating. I could not eat in restaurants. Too many people, too much noise. I would panic, feel my chest tighten, need to leave immediately. Sarah learned to pack meals instead. We ate at home, always at home. I could not watch films about the war. She took me once to see a picture. There was a scene with soldiers in a jungle. I stood up and walked out. Left her sitting there, waited outside until it was over. She never suggested films again. I could not go to veteran gatherings. The British Legion invited me. Other former prisoners, men who wanted to talk about it, share the burden. I went once, lasted 20 minutes, listened to men tell stories about the camps, laughing, finding humor in it, the absurdity, the camaraderie. I could not laugh. I remembered Tommy stealing from corpses. I remembered stepping over dying men. I remembered none of the camaraderie they talked about. I left, never went back. Sarah asked me once, 2 years into our marriage, what it had been like. I was sitting at the kitchen table. She was sewing. The question came out quietly. What was it like, James? In the camp. I looked at her, wanted to tell her, wanted to explain. The words formed in my head. I watched men eat maggots from rice. I stole from the dead. I thought about eating human flesh. I became something that was not human. The words would not come out. I opened my mouth. Nothing. She waited. I stood up, walked out of the room. She never asked again. We had children, 2 daughters, born in 1949 and 1951. I loved them the way you love something you know you do not deserve. I was a terrible father, not abusive, not absent, just empty. I could not play with them, could not laugh with them, could not be present. I provided, I worked, I came home. I sat in silence. That was all I had. Sarah raised them. I was a ghost in my own house. The nightmares never stopped. Every night, sometimes the railway, sometimes Tommy. Sometimes I was back at the worksite and the guards were behind me and I was swinging the hammer, knowing that if I stopped, they would kill me. So I could never stop. I would wake up sweating, gasping, and Sarah would be there saying, "It is all right. You are home. You are safe." But I was not safe. I was never safe. The railway was still there, inside me, growing. In 1967, they aired a documentary on television about the Burma Railway. Sarah was out. The girls were at school. I was alone. I turned it on without thinking. They showed footage of the jungle, the tracks, the bridges, interviews with survivors, Japanese engineers, historians, statistics. 12,621 Allied prisoners of war dead. 90,000 Asian laborers dead. I watched the numbers appear on screen. Numbers. That is what we were. Data points. The documentary talked about the engineering challenges, the monsoon season, the quotas, They made it sound like a construction project, a difficult job. Not murder, not slavery, just difficult. Then they showed photographs, prisoners, skeletal men staring at cameras. I recognized some of them, not names, but faces. Men from my camp, men I had walked past, men I had watched die. One photograph showed a burial detail, 6 prisoners carrying a body wrapped in burlap. In the background, barely visible, another prisoner sitting on the ground. I stared at that prisoner, something about the posture, the way he sat. I stood up, walked closer to the television, looked at the face. It was me. I was in the photograph, sitting in the mud, staring at nothing. I did not remember the photograph being taken. I did not remember that moment. But there I was, proof that I had existed in that place. I turned off the television, sat on the floor. Sarah came home an hour later and found me there. I was not crying, not speaking, just sitting. She asked what was wrong. I told her I saw myself. She did not understand. I did not explain. That night I started writing, not for publication, not for anyone, just for myself. I wrote down everything I could remember, the dates, the names, Tommy, Davies, Patel, Henderson, Briggs, Willis, all of them. I wrote about the work, the beatings, the starvation. I wrote about stealing from corpses, about Tommy and the meat, about stepping over Willis, about everything. It took me 3 months, 50 pages, handwritten. When I finished, I put it in a drawer and never looked at it again. But the act of writing it changed something. Not healed, not fixed, just changed. The railway was still inside me, but it was documented now, acknowledged, real. Sarah found the pages years later, read them, never said anything to me. But after that, she stopped asking me to be different, stopped expecting me to be the man I had been before the war. She accepted what I had become, a damaged thing that looked like her husband but was not really. That acceptance was the kindest thing anyone ever did for me. In 1995, 50 years after the war ended, a group organized a pilgrimage back to Thailand. Survivors, families of the dead, a memorial service. Sarah thought I should go. I said no. She insisted, said it might help, bring closure. I told her there was no such thing as closure. She bought the tickets anyway. We flew to Bangkok, took a bus to Kanchanaburi. The jungle looked the same, dense, green, alive. The heat hit me the moment I stepped off the bus. That wet, heavy heat. I felt 24 again. I felt the hammer in my hand. I felt the hunger in my stomach. Sarah held my arm, asked if I was all right. I lied, said yes. The war cemetery was clean, organized, row after row of white headstones, 6,982 graves, Allied prisoners, names, ranks, dates, some with epitaphs, some just names. I walked through the rows looking for people I knew. Found Davies, Private Robert Davies, Welsh Regiment, died September 1943, age 29. The headstone was white stone, clean. It told you nothing about how he died, about the dysentery, about the dehydration, about the way his hand gripped mine. It was just a stone with a name. I found Tommy, Private Thomas Wilson, Royal Norfolk Regiment, died November the 1943, age 22. I stood in front of his grave for a long time. Sarah stood beside me. She asked if he was a friend. I said yes. She asked what he was like. I opened my mouth to answer, to tell her Tommy was funny, kind, loyal. But those were not the memories I had. I remembered Tommy with a knife, Tommy eating rice from a corpse's tin, Tommy vomiting after every meal, Tommy dying on a bamboo platform with yellow eyes. I could not separate the person he had been from the thing the railway had made him. So I said nothing. Sarah did not push. We attended the memorial service. Veterans spoke. Families laid wreaths. A British official gave a speech about sacrifice and remembrance. A Japanese official gave a speech about reconciliation and apology. I listened to all of it and felt nothing. Words, just words. They could not bring Tommy back, could not undo the railway, could not give me back the years I lost, could not make me human again. After the service, I walked to the river. The bridge was still there, rebuilt, modernized, a tourist attraction now. People walked across it taking photographs, smiling. A vendor sold postcards. I bought one. The image showed the bridge at sunset. Beautiful, romantic. On the back, it said, Bridge on the River Kwai, historic site of World War II railway construction. Construction, not death, not slavery. Construction. I tore the postcard in half and dropped it in the river. An old man approached me while I was standing there. Japanese, maybe 70 years old. He bowed, said something in Japanese, then in broken English. You were prisoner. Here. I looked at him. Yes. He bowed again. Lower. I am sorry. Very sorry. I looked at his face. Lined. Old. Sad. He might have been a guard. He might have been an engineer. He might have been the one who beat Davies, or shot Willis, or any of it. I did not know. Did not ask. He stood there waiting for me to say something, waiting for absolution. Forgiveness. I could not give it to him. I did not have forgiveness. I barely had anything. But I did not have hatred either. Not anymore. Hatred requires energy. I had none left. I looked at him and said very quietly, I do not forgive you, but I do not hate you either. I am just tired. He nodded, bowed once more, walked away. I watched him go and felt empty. We stayed in Thailand for 3 days, visited the museum, looked at the exhibits, tools, photographs, maps, everything preserved behind glass like it was ancient history instead of something that happened in living memory. There was a section about the engineering challenges, another about the Allied bombing campaign that destroyed the railway, another about reconciliation and modern Thai-Japanese relations. Nothing about the theft, nothing about the cannibalism, nothing about what the railway did to the men who built it. It was sanitized, made safe, made into a story that people could consume without discomfort. On the last day, I asked the guide to take me to the worksite. My worksite, the place where I had swung a hammer for 17 months. He looked confused, said most of it was jungle now, reclaimed, no markers. I told him I remembered the way. He drove me. Sarah came with me. We walked into the jungle along an overgrown path. After 20 minutes, I found it. The ridge, the rock face, still there, still gray, still hard. I walked up to it, touched the stone. It was warm from the sun. I looked at the surface, saw the marks, chisel marks, thousands of them, small pits and gouges where men had beaten the stone with hand tools. I traced one with my finger. Someone made this mark. Maybe me, maybe Tommy, maybe someone who died the next day. The mark was still here. We were not. I stood there for a long time. Sarah asked if I wanted to leave. I said not yet. I sat down in the dirt, right there at the base of the ridge. Sat in the same spot I had sat 52 years earlier when I was 24 years old and thought I was going to die. The jungle was thicker now. The path was gone. The camp was gone. The huts, the latrines, the hospital, the burial pits, all of it reclaimed by the jungle. But the rock was still here. The railway was still here, hidden under vines and trees. And somewhere under my feet, maybe 10 meters down, maybe less, were the bones of 12,000 men who never left. I was 76 years old. I had lived longer than Tommy would ever live, longer than Davies, longer than all of them. I had a wife, children, grandchildren, a house, a life. I had survived, but sitting there in the dirt with my hand on the stone, I understood something I had been avoiding for 50 years. I did not survive. Not really. The man who walked away from this place in 1945 was not the same man who had arrived in 1942. That man died here. What walked away was something else. A shell. A mechanism. Something that looked human and functioned as human, but had no humanity left inside. Sarah sat down next to me. Did not speak. Just sat there. We stayed like that for maybe an hour. Then I stood up, brushed the dirt off my trousers, looked at the rock one last time, said goodbye to Tommy, to Davies, to all of them, turned around, walked away, did not look back. We flew home. Life continued. I kept delivering mail. Sarah kept sewing. The girls grew up, got married, had children of their own. I became a grandfather, watched my grandchildren play, and wondered what kind of man I would have been if the war had not happened, if Singapore had not fallen, if I had never seen that railway. I would never know. That version of me was dead, buried somewhere in the Thai jungle under 50 years of growth. I am 90 years old now. Sarah is gone, died 3 years ago. Heart failure, quick, painless. I held her hand while she went. She looked at me at the end and said thank you. I did not know what she was thanking me for marrying her, for staying, for being the broken thing I was instead of the man I should have been. I never asked. She died. I buried her. I live alone now. The nightmares are less frequent, not gone, just less. I still wake at 4 in the morning. Still taste rice soup. Still see Tommy's face. But it is background now, static. I've carried it so long it is just part of me. The railway is in my bones, in my blood, in every thought. I did not leave it behind in Thailand. I brought it home, carried it for 64 years. I will carry it until I die. Then maybe it will die too. Or maybe it will live on in these words, in this testimony, in the record. They ask me sometimes, the historians, the students, the filmmakers, they ask what I want people to know about the railway, what lessons should be learned. I tell them there is no lesson. War is not a classroom. Suffering is not a teaching tool. The railway happened. 12,621 Allied prisoners died. 90,000 Asian laborers died. I survived. That is all. There is no moral, no redemption, no silver lining, just death and survival, and the long, slow process of living with what you did to stay alive. I stole from corpses. I stepped over dying men. I thought about eating human flesh, and the only reason I did not was luck, not morality. I became an animal. Then I came home and pretended to be human again. That is my story. Not heroic, not inspiring, just true. The railway is gone now, bombed by the Allies, reclaimed by the jungle, a tourist attraction, a historical footnote, but it is not gone. It is still here, in me, in the handful of survivors still alive. When we die, maybe it will finally be over. Maybe the jungle will finish swallowing it. Maybe in another 50 years, nobody will remember it at all. Maybe that is for the best. I do not have nightmares about the guards anymore, or the beatings, or the starvation. I have nightmares about Tommy holding out that piece of meat, offering it to me, asking me to cross the line with him. In the nightmare, I take it. I eat it. I become what he became. Then I wake up, and I am 90 years old in an empty house, and I do not know if the nightmare is the dream, or if this is the nightmare, and the railway is the only thing that was ever real. I will die soon. Weeks, months, not years. I can feel it. My body is shutting down the same way Davy's body shut down, the same way Tommy's body shut down. Just slower, more comfortable, in a bed instead of on bamboo, but the same process. I am not afraid. I stopped being afraid in 1943. Fear requires hope. I have none left. When I die, they will bury me next to Sarah. There will be a headstone, James Bradley, dates, maybe an epitaph, beloved husband, father, grandfather. It will not mention the railway, will not mention Tommy or Davies or the 400 men, will not mention that I am not really James Bradley. That man died in Thailand. What they are burying is just the thing that came back, the shell, the ghost. But before I die, I wanted to tell the truth, not the sanitized version, not the heroic version, the real version. I wanted someone to know what the railway really was, what it did to us, what we did to survive it. This is that truth. I was a prisoner of war. I built a railway. I survived. I came home. I lived 64 more years, but I never left that jungle. The jungle never left me. That is the cost. That is what war really does. It does not kill you quickly. It kills you slowly, over decades, and nobody notices because you are still breathing. This is my last testimony. I was Corporal James Bradley. I was prisoner number 473. I survived the Burma Railway, but the railway did not survive me. It consumed me, became me. I am the railway now. That is all I ever was. That is all I will ever be. And when I die, I hope Tommy is waiting, not to forgive me, not to condemn me, just to be there, to know that I carried him with me every single day, that I never forgot, that even though I survived and he did not, I never really survived at all. The war is over. The railway is over, but nothing is ever really over, not for the men who live through it. We just pretend. We smile, we function, we deliver mail and raise children and grow old, but underneath, we are still there, still swinging hammers, still stealing from corpses, still choosing to be animals so we can stay alive one more day. That is the truth. That is my testimony. That is what I wanted to say before I die. I survived, but I never came home.